Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host, Chase Kloetzke.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Epic Voyages. I am Chase Kloetzke, your guest host tonight, with very special guest Fritz Zimmerman. Also with us on the air is our awesome producer, Joe, which is no doubt my rock and backup during the next 90 minutes. Tonight's topic will be on ancient civilizations and, more notably, the amazing people and discoveries found right here in North America. Of course, in classic epic style, we went straight to the top for this information. Fritz Zimmerman is a scholar, independent historian, researcher, and author of a 2-volume series on the Nephilim. He has spent over 12 years in academic and field work in search of the origins and remains of the mound builders. Welcome to our show, Fritz. We're so pleased to have you here. Just so we can get started, I just had a couple quick questions to catch our audience up to some of the basics of our topic. What caught your attention with consideration to sacred mounds and earthworks?
Well, this project started 12 years ago as a short documentary because I had found out, even though I have a history major from Purdue University, I had no idea that there was anything that old in Indiana. And so what started out was to do maybe 4 counties and possibly photograph 5 mound or earthwork sites, just ballooned into 5 states and actually exploring over 700 mound and earthwork sites in Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Michigan. So it just kind of ballooned because there was always something in the next county to explore. And because it all belonged together, then, it was worth going to that next county. And then in the end, is to give people an opportunity to see civilization in its entirety, which you need that 5 states to be able to see everything. So it's really the first time that it's all been stuck together since Squire and Davis in 1843 did Ancient Monuments.
Awesome. Who are the Nephilim?
Well, the Nephilim translates to giants. So just the strict translation is Nephilim is giants. And then, that's associated with sons of God. It's associated with the giants in the Bible. It's associated with, a lot of large people that in the strictest form is just giants.
There were 300 skeletal remains discovered. Have there been any more found since that initial?
Yeah, there's probably some more out there that I didn't get. But the reason that my book has so many and never has there been this many published before is because here in Fort Worth, Indiana, where I'm located, is the second largest genealogical library in the country, meaning I have access to almost every county history in every state. And so the actual list of the giants that's in the book that was done in 2004, 2005, was the result of actually going through about 10,000 historical documents. And that took 16 months working about 8 hours a day.
My goodness.
So it took a long time to do. But I kept finding them. So that was done in 2004, but it was, if you go on the internet, you'll find lots of lists of giants. You're never going to see 300. But it's who were these people? And answering those questions, it took an additional 6 years.
Right. And we are going to get to that in just a moment. I just had a couple quick questions left. There are two terms in your book that reference these people, Amorites and Nephilim. Are they the same people?
The Amorites actually puts an actual people to the giants of who they were. And the Amorites is somebody that we can trace from the biblical lands across Europe into England as the builders of Stonehenge. And then, of course, then we talk about all the hinges in the Ohio Valley, talk about the skeletal remains found in England throughout Europe, and then compare those with the ones in the Ohio Valley. And so, Amorites is really putting a name on who we're talking about.
Okay. What are falling angels?
Excuse me?
What are falling angels?
The fallen angels is more associated with the book of Enoch. And within a historical context, with the fallen angels are the ones that taught the giants how to work metal. They taught them how to track the course of the moon, how to track the course of the sun. They taught them symbolism of the earth, which involves earth mother worship. And so if you read that book of Enoch and about the fallen angels and what they taught the giants, it historically places everything right at the beginning of the Bronze Age. So Stonehenge and metalworking and all of that comes to tuition right around the times of Babylon is what they're talking about in that book of events. But a lot of times it's confused with devils and everything else. But if you look at the biblical teachings and writings as more of a historical text, that's what it's talking about. So, that's in there, but I wouldn't get too convoluted in the whole story about the fallen angels and how all that works in with, a demonic presence, because that's not really where this goes.
Exactly. Now we can get to the good part, which are, who are these giants and are they hybrids?
Yes, the giants were actually more of an upper Paleolithic, which would put them, who scientists call Cro-Magnon, and not Cro-Magnon in having modern facial features, but one thing that is consistent in what few remains have been found around Israel, and especially in the British Isles and also in the Ohio Valley, is what is called archaic type skulls that have some real distinguishing attributes to them of a protruding brow ridge, a sloped forehead, massive jaw, thick skull walls, and we find that same skeletal type in all three regions, and especially in the Ohio Valley.
Fritz, how big are these giants?
They are as large as 9 foot, and a few 8 foot, and a lot of 7 foot. So if you're going to draw a graph, there'd probably be more 7 footers, less 8 footers, but also some that were 9 foot, but nothing exceeding 9.
Okay. Where have their remains been found?
Excuse me?
Where have their remains been found?
They are found in the greatest numbers, a few in Jerusalem, quite a few of them in England, Scotland, and Ireland, but most of them in England and Scotland. And then the most, of course, in the Ohio Valley and right around all the hinges and large mounds. But there's another contingent of giants that are isolated to the coastlines and the Great Lakes region, which was a subsequent or earlier migration of the hunters and fishers that happened between 7000 BC and 2000 BC.
Right.
So there's two waves that came in to North America.
Okay. The Amorites have a elongated skull, and they were first considered Peruvian. But how did they differ from modern skulls?
Well, there's the people that built Stonehenge were a makeup of three separate people. There was the corded people, there was the Dinaric, and there was Borby Cro-Magnon. Now, the corded people had longer skulls, but the Dinaric skulls are really the odd ones because those are the ones where the back of their heads are flat. But they also still have those archaic traits of the protruding brow ridge, facial prognathicism, and so they have those archaic traits to them, but the backs of their heads are flat. Now, they've been mistaken for Peruvian skulls. In Europe in the early 1800s, when they first started finding these skulls, their first thought was that someone had a Peruvian skull, took it to somewhere in Europe, lost it, and then somebody else found it. And it wasn't until they had found about 4 or 5 of them that they realized that they were dealing with a people, or a separate people than Peruvians, of course. But then they found one of those skulls at the gates of Damascus in Jerusalem that was described as massive.
Wow.
So the Peruvian, I use that example because a lot of times they'll show the skull, but also in the book I'll show that the Peruvian skulls don't have some of the same attributes as you would find in England or in the Ohio Valley. And that's, the largeness of them and then those archaic traits.
Fritz, how did they travel across the continents? I mean, were they maritime or did they walk?
No, they were a maritime people. The Amorites didn't start out that way, but eventually, as they became more populated on the coastline of the Mediterranean, they took on maritime, and then they were so involved in the copper trade that kind of led to them being more of a maritime people than they originally started when they took Babylon in 1950 BC. But right around 1500 BC, they had taken to the seas and were going long distances, and had mixed with that original wave that had come over here, and I think that's probably where they found out about the copper deposits that would have brought them over here. Because, like I said, there's copper was king in the Bronze Age, so they couldn't get enough of it. So to have found Isle St. Royal would have been the mother lode. But maritime people, yeah, everything was boat or ship.
There's a similar material culture is found across the world, tools and artifacts, and are there even more earthwork similarities?
Yes. The earthwork similarities are certainly found in the hinge. And a hinge is described as a circular earthwork with an outer wall and an inner ditch, and usually one gateway that breaches the ditch that's aligned to a solar event. And we have hinges in Germany. Of course, we have hinges in England, and then we have hinges in the Ohio Valley that are identical. And then if you look at the weapons from up around the copper culture, you have tang daggers, you have daggers that have a midrib for strength. You have state-of-the-art weapons technology that is associated with the copper culture, and it's the same that is being manufactured for the Egyptian, the Hittite armies over in the Mideast. But
right.
The other part of that material culture is that initial wave that came over here from 7,000 to 2,000 BC with the hunters and fishers, and there you find slate spears, plummets, and there's another material culture. We can track it all the way around the world. So that first wave, you could find the same material culture in Europe, Siberia, the northern Japanese islands, California, and in Maine.
There are
And
two migrations that, you've just mentioned too, and migrations into the Great Lakes. Why did they migrate? Do you think it had to do with the copper? Once they found it, that's now in other words, is it, economics of the copper? Do you think it was exploration, or even something as simple as hunting and gathering?
Well, the copper certainly would have been an impetus for the Amorites to come here and exploit that, because copper was gold in 2500, 2000 BC. And so that would have led the Amorites over here, but I think it was initially found by the hunters and fishers, and they pushed into the Great Lakes because while you have a similar material culture, when you get up around northern Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, northern Indiana, it's hundreds, thousands of lakes. And that is the same topography that you would find in northern Europe, across Siberia. And so wherever they moved, they didn't have to adapt to a new climate or a new landscape, because it was all the same. And it's around that 65-degree latitude. There really is no difference in the topography. So it was natural for them to move into the lakes regions because they were hunters and fishers, so they were sustaining both on hunting and fishing. On the coastline, that meant more of a sea maritime existence, which took them down the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast. And from the extent of the Atlantic coast and the extent of the Pacific coast, artifacts, skeletal remains are identical.
There is 550,000 tons of copper missing. Is there a theory where this may have gone?
Egypt.
Really?
Egypt, it was eventually going to be going over for the manufacturing of bronze weapons. And the thing about Isle St. Royal copper is that it is 99.9% pure, and the only impurity in it is silver. And so it'll have occasional little silver spots. And there have been Egyptian artifacts that have found where they had those specks in it. But because all our information on the ancient world is so tied in with archaeologists, who of course are not going to admit that Isle St. Royal copper is found in Egyptian bowls, that door is slammed shut. But
yes, it is.
Yeah. Along with the weapons technology, which is certainly an indicator that weapons technology had made it to Wisconsin, it would also say that they were moving that out. And with all that missing copper, well, where did it go? It's not found in mounds. It's not found anywhere. And the only real answer is that it was being exported.
Do you think there's a connection between prehistoric mining and the sacred sites in all of these areas? Do you find those evidence of mining?
There is mining. There's some mining that is pretty unexplainable in the same area of Pennsylvania where they initially found oil here. It's called Oil Creek. This is something that hopefully I can explore this year. But in and around that Titusville area, there are 5,000 pits. They go down about 6 foot. They were all cribbed with logs. And so the oil would seep up into these holes that were lined. But there were 5,000 of them.
My goodness.
And that area had to have been where all of the oil to do lamps and everything else had to have been coming out of there. I don't know that would have been exported, but it obviously was being sent domestically through the Ohio Valley and wherever else they needed oil. But 5,000 pits just gives you an idea of the large scale that some of these things were going on. There's another place in Pennsylvania where there was an ancient lead mine. And so everything that is ancient and you would find is just contemporaneous with what they were doing around that 1500 BC, 2000 BC time period. But not necessarily sacred sites, because I don't think Royal is somewhat void of that. But certainly there's spots around that could be investigated, especially those pits and around Titusville, that just gives you an indication of who these people were and at what lengths, that they were going. An industrious people, definitely.
Exactly, industrious. That's what I love that discovery. What are the common structures associated with these mounds and earthworks?
What are the structures associated with them?
Like the common ones, like the ones in the Ohio Valley that are similar with Stonehenge and the British Isles or Levant.
Well, in the Levant, there is burial mounds that are encircled with stones, and that whenever you see anything with a circle around it, it's usually solar worship. And we find the same types of mounds. We track those through the Ukraine and through Europe. That when you go and you look at burial mounds over in England, a lot of them have that circle around them. And we find that in the Ohio Valley. And then we find the hinge, and we find that, of course, in great numbers in England, and then we find it again over here. You find burial mounds that are kind of loaf-shaped, and those have a ditch around them that's constricted in the middle. We find that in England. We find that over here. So a lot of the similar shapes of even like the Tarleton Cross is duplicated over in England. In Oban, Scotland, they have a serpent mound that is pointing to 3 peaks, where the serpent mound in Ohio is pointing to 3 creeks coming together. And the one in Oban has 3 bends, and the one in Ohio has 3 bends. And there's a stone cairn in the mouth of the one in Oban and over in Ohio. So we can just about find anything in Ohio, mound type wise or earthwork type, and then find its duplicate in England, except for the circles and the squares, and that seems to be unique to the Ohio Valley.
Oh, and that
but
also brings up...
The symbolism is not unique, but the earthworks are.
Right. That brings up the, excuse me, the complex mathematics developed by the Amorite Babylonians. So you discuss a gematria, or sacred marriage of the gods, sun and the moon, and the numeric codex developed by the Amorites based on 666 for the Sun Father and 1080 for Earth Mother.
Yes, and that is probably one of the most exciting discoveries in the book.
I think so too.
The Babylonians, the Amorites took Babylon in 1950 BC, and it's also at that same time that they developed high math. And they based it on what's called the duodecimal system, or a base 6. And base 6 is what we still use today. We use it when you measure something that's 12 inches, and on our clocks, which are also on a base 6.
Absolutely. The number 666, often related to the devil, is a number that's really misunderstood. So how does that relate for the Sun Father?
Well, that was another thing that the Babylonians developed, was this gematria codex. And they had something called the magic square, and this square, and no matter which way you add it up, it's 111. And then there's 6 of those per side. But 666 to them was a number that represented the sun, and then 1080 was with the moon. And there's some things about cataclysms and Earth time periods, and there's some more stuff that goes with that. But those were the base numbers, and most people are familiar with 666 from Revelations. However, what they don't do or understand is that if you read that quote, it says, "He who hath understanding count the number." And so it's not the number itself, but it's to count it. So if you think of the context in which that was written for the Bible and who was persecuting the Jews at that time, it was the Romans. So then if you count the Roman numerical system and go 500, 100, 50, 10, 5, 1, and you count that, what you get is 666. So that quote is in reference to that, because there's two other places in the Bible where 666 shows up. In one is in Chronicles, and they bring Solomon 666 talents of gold. And if we look at the name Solomon itself, Sol, of course, easy, is Latin for sun. Is Hindi for sun, and An is Egyptian for sun. So Solomon's name means sun, sun, sun. And so for them to bring 666 was using the true interpretation of that number. And it also shows up again in, I'm not sure what book it's in, but it's when they were fleeing Nebuchadnezzar, and one of the chief was Adonacham. And Adon, whenever you think of that, you think of Adonis, which is a Phoenician sun god, which would be, down the road related to the Amorites. But with him was 666 people. So we have it show up 3 times in the Bible. 2, it's used in its right form as to the sun, and then the third, it's really referring to the Romans. But what's key about that is the next quote in Revelations, because there's 144,000 people that are saved. Well, if you divide 144,000 by 666, you get 216.216 to infinity.